Hi, everybody, and welcome to this next episode of Let Me Introduce You. I'm so excited you're here. I'm Marion Roach Smith, and we're going to be together for about 50 minutes today, just short of an hour, while I introduce you to Amy Suto and we talk about ghostwriting, how it works, who does it, what it teaches us about what sells, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So all you have to do is sit back and relax and listen. There is a recording being made of this. You'll get that recording tomorrow if you've registered. I see people are still showing up, which is great. And we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover. So what we're going to do is talk about who we are. I'm Marion Roach Smith. I founded the Memoir Project. These programs are what we do here at the Memoir Project, which is to show and share what we know here about writing and the writing life. And we bring you this almost once a month. Let me introduce you. Almost once a month. We took the summer off, but I'm really excited that we're back today doing this. I think it's a wonderful thing. And here is Amy Suto. And from televisions to novels to scripted podcasts, she's written story-driven content and copy for a lot of different companies and clients. She founded the podcast production company Kingdom of Pavement and runs Pseudoscience LLC, where she ghostwrites memoirs and creative copy for inspiring people all over the world. But even better than reading her bio, I can say hello to her. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Now, I'm currently calling in from Vienna, Austria. I'm a digital nomad and I'm also here on a work trip. I'm ghostwriting a memoir for a client here in Austria. And so I'm very lucky that my writing allows me to travel the world and see beautiful places and yeah, excited to be here and chat all things ghostwriting.
I think it's great. And I love the idea that you told us where you're calling in from because the fact is you are a digital nomad. And that was kind of the way we met. I saw that phrase and said, "What? How does that work? What are you doing?" And I thought it was fascinating. And it's an exciting life that you have. And it's a very productive writing life that you have. And I think you have a lot to share with us and with everyone on the line about how that works. So let's just jump right in. So I want to talk a little bit because I always like to establish the authority of the guests that come along. So you've really published widely: the Los Angeles Times, BBC Worldwide, Entrepreneur, Forbes, Parade, US News, Vulture, the Freelancer's Year. It goes on and on. And you've worked with nearly 200 clients, and it ranks really well up in the top 1% of over 12 million freelancers on the freelance platform Upwork. And you've ghostwritten books for Silicon Valley CEOs, Olympic athletes, owners of baseball teams, and lots of people who you, of course, cannot name. So why don't you just give us a sense, as before we jump in and talk about what ghostwriting is and how it works, in how you turned your attention to this work?
Yeah, so I started my career in Hollywood as a TV writer, and I was able to climb my way up the ladder and write for some really exciting different projects. And I even got to get to the lucrative point where I was able to get my first written TV credit, and I was like, wow, I've made it. I see my work on screen. This is fantastic. But then I just realized it wasn't feeling as good as I thought it would. It wasn't kind of hitting the boxes that I was looking for. And I just felt in myself this feeling of wanting to travel. And at the same time, I'd been ghostwriting memoirs and I'd been starting that business while I was working my way up the ladder of Hollywood. And during that kind of ascent, I was realizing that the books that I was ghostwriting for people they were changing lives. People were so grateful to be able to have my help in telling their stories. And they were also willing to pay me a lot more than what I was getting paid in Hollywood, where often people were trying to get you to work for free or kind of stringing you along, or it just didn't really make sense. The math wasn't mathing with the way that people were valuing my work in Hollywood versus the way that my clients were really valuing my work as a memoir ghostwriter. And so when 2020 happened and everything shut down and the writer's room that I was in went to a Zoom room, I had to kind of reevaluate my relationship with Hollywood. And I decided at that point to lean a lot more into my ghostwriting work. And that paved the way for me to be able to travel and to be able to see the world and work remotely and also meet up with my clients more in person. And I had started to do that a little bit and tiptoed into that world before the 2020 kind of era, but that was when I really just kind of decided to go all in on freelancing and everything changed from there.
That's wonderful, and it's a story of a lot of intrepid insight, but also, real good experience. I too worked in Hollywood in my 20s. I too experienced a sense of dissatisfaction following big success. So I don't think it's unheard of at all. It's an odd success of a bit of shared experience. There's a lot of more ownership in writing books. There's a lot more direct to page work. There's that satisfaction of things being the way you wrote them as opposed to having the thing script doctored to death. And I too made a pivot. So I totally identify with that. Fun as it was, financially rewarding as it was. But you make a very interesting point here too that I actually use as a quote in the opening of my little book on how to write memoir, and that is the satisfaction of helping other people tell their tales. And the quote that opens my book says, "There's an old saying that most men would rather have you hear their story than grant their wish." And you've experienced this with so many clients of the deep and really meaningful satisfaction of helping them get their voices out in the world. So I really congratulate you on that. I really honor that as something of percolating up the voices of others. And Vienna sounds pretty good too. How's the chocolate?
It's amazing. No, it's really sometimes I have to pinch myself and be like, wow, I'm here for work that my writing has gotten me here for. And
Yeah.
and that kind of like phrase, like my writing has gotten me here, it just like feels surreal because I remember when I was working as a minimum wage assistant in Hollywood and I would show up at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf at 5 a.m. to write my own work and try to build my career. And I just couldn't imagine that I would be flown out by clients to these beautiful places to be able to help them tell their stories. And it's just such an honor. And I take this work really, really seriously because most people only tell their life story once. And that this is such an honor to be able to be entrusted with that work.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. Well, let's jump in and talk about who's on the line. So the people that I work with are memoir writers, and so they are writing memoir. Someone who is at some stage of doing so and is unaware how a ghostwriter might help them how to gauge what sells in this publishing environment. So I think they probably have two or three major questions. Maybe some of the people on the line want to become ghostwriters, so and I should not dismiss that at all. So just to give you a sense, the Memoir Project is mostly memoir writers, although my newsletter goes out to lots of people who write and have not yet settled on memoir. And my podcast goes out to every kind of writer. So we could have a real diverse group. So here's the true or false. I think people think that, oh, I just turned my entire life over to a ghostwriter and they get this thing and I get this thing back in the mail and we're done. So I get the feeling I know the answer to this question, Amy, but true or false?
Yeah, definitely false. And I think that a lot of people don't recognize the fact that you just can't be like, here's my story, good luck, have fun. At every step of the writing process, there are decisions to be made. How is this story going to be told? How is this scene going to play out? Let's, dive deeper into what you were feeling during this moment that I need to dig a little deeper with you. And so working with clients is often this kind of building this relationship of I'm almost like a reporter, kind of asking them questions and trying to dig deeper and connect the dots of the theme that encircles their memoir. And they need to be a bit of a participant in that, and they need to be able to dive in those memories with me. And some people kind of show up at my door with, piles of diaries and different things, and those are all really great materials to start with, but most of the work happens in these interviews where I really dig deeper with people when we get to that layer beyond the surface of just what happened
Yep.
and really to kind of how they felt during those moments and a greater kind of stepping back and building the themes of their life.
Yeah, that's lovely and very, very well put. I think it is a surprise. I just talked to somebody 2 days ago who wants a ghostwriter, and as I gave to that person some cursory explanation of what they should expect, they were shocked. They thought somehow they just handed them their filing cabinet. I was like, no. Okay, so what is ghostwriting and how does it work? So let's just start with what it's not or what it's commonly mistaken for. I think it's mistaken for a personal stenographer. I think it's mistaken for inexpensive. And I think it's mistaken for being a quick process. Like, here you go, here are my files. I hope they can get them back in, a few weeks. So maybe you can give us a little bit against the idea of the personal stenographer. We're going to talk in a minute about the cost, but I wanted to just tell people right up front. And why don't you also just dispel the idea of immediate?
Definitely, yeah. I think that a lot of people, I mean, when you're going through the memoir process, it's not just, okay, here's my story, A to B, let's just tell it page by page. You've lived a complex life, and to be able to capture that on the page requires a deep understanding of story structure and how your life will be structured in a way that a reader will enjoy. And that's the thing that really differentiates, a memoir from a diary. You're
Hmm.
writing to be read in a memoir. You're writing for an audience. And that means that you have to shape your story around those beats of story structure. And you're not just telling this happened, and this happened, and this happened. You're trying to really create an artistic framework around your life. And that might mean telling parts of your stories out of order. That might mean kind of, trying to juxtapose moments next to each other in a way that evokes deeper meaning. And so a personal stenographer is not going to do that. They're not going to add that level of artistry and really kind of like that imbue your story with something more. And so a memoir ghostwriter is going to be elevating your story for readers, not just typing what you're saying. And then in terms of when you're hiring a memoir ghostwriter, they're likely going to spend 6 months, maybe more, depending on how intensely they're working on your book, how much time and availability you have to work with them. And the process takes time. And because you're hiring a professional who has a background as a professional writer who can devote a large amount of time and energy to your book, that's not inexpensive. Like you're also looking for somebody who's going to do your story justice and can also write in your voice and be a chameleon. And those traits are very rare to find. And I'm lucky to have developed my ability to write in someone else's voice, partially from my experience writing in fiction and writing in Hollywood, where I had to write in different characters' different voices of different shows or different kinds of styles. And so in order to have a book that is worth reading, you need to hire somebody with the expertise and the time and the interest to tell that story. And
Yeah.
all that entire process just takes a lot longer than people realize because so much emerges in the book writing process that people start to recognize things or remember things. Or sometimes I also interview friends and family and kind of start to add these other perspectives in the book that kind of make it more full than it ever was to begin with. And every book is kind of like a block of clay that is continually shaped throughout the process and evolves from page one to the final draft.
Yeah, I love all the texture of that answer. And I think it's so helpful. And I love the intent that we're not just mimicking, we're trying to get your voice onto the page. And having collaborated twice, once on a screenplay, once on a major book length piece for Simon and Schuster, I wrote with somebody, but it had to be in his voice. We both had equal credit on the book, but we decided to write through his voice. That was a fascinating experience for me to understand the way he saw the world. And that's a real effort on the part of the ghostwriter. Good, 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 good. That's so helpful. So why do people hire ghostwriters? I said the top three reasons, but you might have eight, or you might have two, whatever. But what do you think are the leading reasons why people say, I need a ghostwriter or I want a ghostwriter?
Yeah, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who value their time and they understand when they are working in their own business and they want to get something done at a really high quality of output. They don't just go and spend 10 years to learn that specific skill themselves. They hire an expert to help them. And that's why hiring a ghostwriter is really important because unless you are wanting to start your own career as a writer and spend years developing your craft and understanding story structure and becoming this kind of like expert and craftsman yourself, then you probably are going to want to hire somebody because then the only other option, if you're not going to become that craftsman, is to kind of put together a book based on what you can learn on the internet. And everyone's first book is often not going to be very good. And so when it comes to your life story, you want it to be in the hands of an expert. And the time needed to become an expert is just so vast that people hire ghostwriters to save time. And because they want to work with somebody who is specialized. And those are a lot of the reasons that people work with ghostwriters. But another one that people don't think about is that writing a book is a team sport. And especially when you're writing your own life story, you need an outside perspective to help add some depth to it. Because as you know, when people are reading your life story, it's helpful to have somebody who's on the outside to be like, oh, this story is really fascinating. Can you dive in deeper here? Like, let's talk more about this. And what I kind of do is shine a flashlight on the pieces of someone's life that they might not even realize come together in an interesting way to form a deeper meaning. And having that outside perspective really helps to shape a book. And even writers who don't work with ghostwriters really rely heavily on editors, on agents, on people that can help them fill out their book and their story. And so working with a ghostwriter, especially on a memoir, just really adds that extra dimension of somebody else looking into your story and helping you to kind of piece out the parts that you're maybe too close to look at yourself. And I think that that is kind of why a ghostwriter as an extra team member that can really help, you know, a busy entrepreneur or somebody who really needs, you know, that extra lens on their experience to translate it to the readers.
Yeah, I think those are very good reasons. And I think the depth piece is fascinating. I edit a lot of manuscripts, and frequently people just gloss over the most important scenes. They understand that that scene was essential to their change, a pivot they had to make, a go deeper sense of something. And they say, I went deeper into that. And the result was, and I say, no, we need a scene here. We need to see this. We need to witness this transition, this transposition on your part to something deeper. And it is true. Another set of eyes, right, is terrific. So, how exactly does it work? You get a call, you get an email, and you don't get a call anymore. You get an email, and somebody says, "I want to talk to you." Or predominantly, it sounds, or at least what I've heard you mention a couple of times here, that there's a lot of business people who want to write memoir. And I get that. I've always long been encouraging of people who have successful businesses creating a book, maybe even self-publishing that book, so that they kind of, reverse engineer this whole process and have the book to give to their clients, or to build their business, or to celebrate the size of their business, or to explain how their business got to be what it is. Or there's lots and lots of reasons why someone with a successful business might really benefit from having a book. But so you get an email. Do you map out how long it takes? Can you just walk us through how you explain how much input is required from each subject? So let's start with, how does it work? Does it work with an initial email, and then you do what?
Yeah, definitely. So when I receive an initial email, usually the first thing that I do is kind of suss out, because I receive a lot of emails every day from people wanting their memoir written, and so I like to get started by sending people a little bit of information about the ghostwriting process. I get to know a little bit about what their book is about before we hop on a call, just because I have to protect my time with the clients that I'm currently working with. And so before I hop on a call, I usually like to just ask a few questions and get to know somebody before we move further. And then when we hop on a call, I like to just start by getting to know what is their story, what is their goal for the book, because I think that that's really important, that I'm aligned with their goal for the book and I understand where they're coming from. And then I can also kind of set expectations for what the process looks like and to help to educate them. And so that initial call is to kind of kick that off. And then from there, if they want to move forward and we get started, I always start with what I call a macro outline. So a big picture outline discussing, like, based on those initial interviews that I do after the discovery call, and when we just hop on Zoom calls, or sometimes we meet in person for intensive in-person interviews, I begin to build this macro outline that outlines how the themes of their book tie together, the big story movements, the important scenes, the different characters in their life, and how it all comes together. And so that big picture outline is kind of the first touchstone of what their book concept will look like. And that's the first document that I put together for them so that we can talk through that and I can make any changes based on that. And then I move to a chapter by chapter outline, which is a lot more detailed. From there, I get into the book writing process. I love being collaborative with my clients. I think as a ghostwriter, it's so important to be collaborative at every chapter, because so often we'll get to chapter 3 and then they'll be like, oh, I forgot to tell you about this moment. And suddenly it kind of shifts the direction of the draft. And so as I'm sharing them the chapters that I'm writing, the draft can sometimes evolve or change based on them thinking more deeply about these moments and us connecting the dots together about their life. And sometimes in this process, we also see that I need additional interviews or things like that. So the entirety of the writing process from first interview to through the edit stage and final draft can take around 6 months to sometimes a year. Sometimes I've even worked with the client for 2 years. It kind of depends on how available that client is and what their schedule is. But I think that shorter timelines are a little bit better, closer to like the 6 to 8 month range, because I like to take on fewer clients and work more intensely. Because I found that if the book stretches out for too long, we lose the thread, it becomes harder to get back into it, and life can just get in the way. And so I think it's important that if you're committing to putting a book together and hiring a ghostwriter, that you really see it through and kind of condense the timeline. And so that's the way that I usually work with clients. And in terms of how much input is required from my clients, it really kind of depends, but we definitely need a lot. I need to make sure that in the beginning of the process when I'm interviewing them, that I understand their motivations and really get to know who they are as a person to be able to craft their voice. And throughout the process of the draft, it's really critical that they're able to kind of help imbue the details into the scenes and tell me how they were feeling in a moment, because that is the stuff that is going to make the draft feel personal and real. And so as I'm generating chapters, I'm also sending them follow-up questions and hopping on calls with them and talking through moments so that I can feel full at every turn. And so there's different clients that just immediately come to me. They have a full idea of the story they want to tell. They're able to kind of jump into memories and vivid detail. And then there are clients that are a little bit more reticent, a little bit more, maybe introverted or quiet. And for them, sometimes it requires a little bit more coaxing of getting information out on the page. And for some people, it just feels a little odd to talk about themselves. So the input is
Yes.
kind of dependent on the client.
Yeah. Yeah. The awkwardness of talking about oneself, despite what we think we want to do, is a fascinating tension, I think. And in there, usually there's so much truth, of course. So how do we locate you by knowing about you, by finding you online? But, we go online and we say ghostwriter for memoir, and suddenly there's so many hits online. So how do you assess their quality? How do you assess their success? And then we'll talk about cost. But first, how in the world is a person supposed to know if this person can get the job done, if the writing is good? What are the ways to best assess another person's success, another writer's success?
Yeah, I think it's really important that everything feels a bit like there's a personal chemistry match that needs to come in the ghostwriting process too, because a memoir ghostwriter that you're hiring to, share your entire life story with is somebody that you need to be able to trust, somebody who you just like spending time with, because there'll be a lot of calls that you'll be spending quite a lot of time with this person. And so in terms of the chemistry fit, I think that you have to hop on a call to kind of see, who is this person? Do I like talking to them? Do I feel comfortable sharing my story with them? But in terms of assessing quality and skill level, it's important to kind of understand what types of writing, what types of credentials do you want to see, and what types of things are important for you in having this ghostwriter write your life story. And I've had clients who've hired me off of short stories that they read of mine, that they felt that it just felt like the type of style they wanted me to emulate in their book. When I was kind of more earlier on in my career, I was told by a client that he went with me over a much more seasoned writer who had, a dozen published books out, because he just liked my energy and my excitement and enthusiasm for the project more. And so I think the level of how you're assessing a ghostwriter is a big investment, but there has to be that dual component of, you want somebody with the skills and experience that they've published something, or they have work that you can view out in the world. They have some level of success, in their field or in their background that speaks to you, but you also just want to make sure that they're a right fit for you and your story, and that they're excited about it. And that is almost the most important thing, because if somebody can have all the credentials in the world, but if they're not excited about working with you, they kind of just seem to be going through the emotions, then they're not going to be the right fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the cost? How do we, well, how what does it cost?
Yeah, so the cost for hiring a memoir ghostwriter can range quite a bit. If you're looking to hire a more experienced ghostwriter, you're looking closer to 50 to over $100,000 for your book project, but it depends on a variety of factors, such as do you expect that ghostwriter to show up in person to interview you for the beginning of the project? Some of my projects have been true crime cases where I had to read a ton of court cases and I interviewed lawyers, and then it required a depth of research that went beyond a traditional memoir. And so kind of the expectations of the project also dictates the cost as well as the expertise of the ghostwriter. And so it really depends on the ghostwriter you're looking to hire, but I've seen a lot of more experienced ghostwriters charge at least a minimum of $50,000 for a full book, but it really depends on what your budget is, what experience level that you're looking for from a ghostwriter.
Sure. And I think what people need to understand is this is a full-time experience for a ghostwriter. This is not something where we just take dictation and in a couple of weeks we whip something out. But we need to make a living wage and a bit more than that if we're going to travel. So it's a big job. I was explaining this to somebody the other day who was just shocked when I said some of the prices. They said, "Well, why?" And well, because it's a full-time job and you want the very best that you can possibly get. So you have some really good advice on your site at amysuto.com, and you talk to us about what to consider and understand the importance of the professional credentials. I think that's essential. You can ask. Many people of, let's just say, an older generation may not be as familiar with some of the large online sites and how popular they are. They expect to see New York Times, Newsweek, which doesn't isn't really something that I would think of as being important anymore. And oh, I don't know, Esquire magazine, right? Because that's what they grew up with. But you know more. You come from a generation where you understand what the credentials really mean online these days, where people have written, where they've published. We want to have the experience and awareness of both the traditional and self-publishing spaces. High-end book ghostwriters are an investment. Be sure to work with a book ghostwriter who is also a published author. Understand how you want to work with your book ghostwriter and know your timeline. So let's drill in a little bit to the whole idea of being a published author. I consider this to be an absolute standard for when people say, "Oh, I've got 5 beta readers and I've got 15 and I've got 3 people who are editors working." And I think, wait a minute, hold on. What are their qualifications? One good person is worth their weight in rubies. 8 divergent opinions will make you crazy. So talk to me about published author and why this is such an important commodity.
Definitely. If you're looking to hire somebody who is a book ghostwriter, you want somebody who has walked the journey of publishing a book themselves. And I think that that is so important and often overlooked because when it's like you wouldn't hire somebody to build you a home who's never built a house before. You want that experience firsthand. And I also think that in the ghostwriting space, it's so difficult when you're working as a deep ghost and you can't share any samples for clients that have you under NDAs. And so in my work, I've really kind of gone the extra mile and not only published books for samples, but because I love the publishing process. I love books. And I think that that really shows whenever, my clients or potential clients are reading the books that I've published, they're just telling me that they're worth their weight in gold and they understand that I'm going to bring the same level of care to their book that I put into my own books. And so it's a good litmus test to see how much has this ghostwriter invested in their own career as an author. And I think that those types of ghostwriters are able to really bring the artistry to the work because you can tell that they love it and they're not just doing it as a side hustle. And that's kind of the differentiator because as anybody knows, writing and publishing a book is such a journey. And I think that finding that person that has gone through that journey and the ups and downs and all of the edits and the pulling your hair out, it's like, is this good enough? And putting something out there and standing behind it, they need to do that for themselves so that you know that they can do it for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand. Lots and lots of people talked about Jay Moringer being the ghostwriter on Prince Harry's book, and the book was, of course, entitled Spare. But what they don't understand is that Jay Moringer, I happen to know, started as a copy boy at the New York Times right after I was a copy boy at the New York Times, and I was referred to as a copy boy, despite my gender. And he is a biographical ghostwriter, but he has published really, really well, including one of the loveliest books I've ever read, The Tender Bar, which is a memoir that was then made into a film by a couple of years ago, I guess, by Ben Affleck, starring Ben Affleck. I think it was directed by Ben Affleck. And so these are credentials. These are real credentials. He knows the publishing business. It's not surprising that he was chosen to write Spare with Prince Harry because he's an extraordinarily good writer. I don't know what he got paid for it. I don't care. But credentials, they make a big difference. And I'm so glad that you dug into that. That's essential to everybody's understanding. So let's see. We've got what can you pass along from your ghostwriting experience about judging the market? How what can you say to these very eager writers on the line who are wondering what is it about their piece or book that might interest an agent or publisher, and how to construct that piece or book, or when to bring in an editor to help them get that to a place of excellence so that it will attract attention. So give us a little bit of a crossover advice here from what you've observed in the publishing world, please.
Definitely. I think that the core thing about any piece that you're writing that you're trying to sell is thinking about who is your ideal reader. And if you can see your ideal reader clearly, then so can the gatekeepers, so can the agents and publishers. And I think that a lot of people, when they're writing their stories, it's so easy to just look inward and being like, I want to tell this story because I want to do this and I want to do this. But you have to change your kind of perspective and look outward and being like, this story is going to be something that is valuable because of what it will give to people's lives. And that's why in book proposals, so there has to be the section of how is this book going to be marketed? What are books similar to this book? And so having that understanding of what your ideal reader will see in your piece or in your book will really kind of affect the way you're putting it together and the way that you're talking about it. And that's almost as important as the content itself. But if you're starting from a point of thinking about your reader, everything else just becomes more clear, because when you're having conversations with these gatekeepers about your book, you're putting that reader front and center so that they can see them too. So I think that that's at the core of everything. And I think that for most people, they think about, okay, what is trendy? What is something that is, that it seems like it'll sell right now? And some people have been able to maybe kind of like jump on the bandwagon of certain trends, but I don't think that that is something that will build a career and will really be a lasting thing. And you could always go in the wrong direction and jump on a trend, and then it ends before your book comes out and it flops. And so I think chasing trends is the way to not go about doing things.
Boy, do I love that advice. I mean, if one more person, talks to me about their comps, and I worry about these idea of, comparable books in book proposals sometimes because people say it's just like so and so. And I think, well, that's not the question. The question is it, did you take two different books and sort of, two different book ideas? It's, a solo woman's travel combined with, learning the Buddhist way. If you but if you just think you're writing another Eat, Pray, Love, you're in deep trouble because there's a million imitators that have been proposed to publishing. And you want to make sure that you've got your very own version. The comp is supposed to give the publisher a sense of why those books sold and why yours will too. But it's not supposed to give you an outline, right? Or an idea. And it's a difficult thing for beginning writers to understand what the value of those comparables really is intended to be. It's a purely marketing question, not a content question, is what I always tell people. So
Definitely.
when to bring in an editor, what do you think in terms of that whole idea of, people saying to me, I've got 5 beta readers, or I've got this, I've got that. What's your rule on how many people, or what's your feeling, let's say, on how many people can be helpful to one book?
It really depends on the book, and it depends on the intended impact. And I think that sometimes if a book feels like we're trying to walk a high wire with the tone, or there are things that really need to be sharpened, then I think bringing in a lot of beta readers and outside readers that are able to kind of give more unbiased opinions on the draft is really important. But for some books that just seem to have universal appeal dripping off the page from the jump after the initial draft is created, I think it kind of depends. I think editors are worth their weight in gold, and it's so great to bring in an external developmental editor and get their thoughts and feedback. And that's something that I do a lot with my projects is to be able to like loop in these really smart people to give feedback. But ultimately, the book itself has to evolve the way that it needs to, and so many cooks in the kitchen won't necessarily make it better. The
Yeah.
client's vision has to be able to be matched with good pitches and good solutions that bring the book to a better spot, not just having a lot of voices come in to muddle the process.
Yeah, great advice. That's a wonderful answer, and I really appreciate it. Let's see if we can get these slides to move. So, I think like many collaborations, you have to take advice from your ghostwriter from the beginning and put your heads together, make your comfort zone areas clear, what's on the record, what's off, or what's the territory. But like, what else? What would you suggest if somebody's going to contact a ghostwriter they be prepared for in terms of this really intimate experience?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand how to communicate ahead of time what parts of your life you may want to omit from the book, or what pieces of your story that you want presented a certain way, or if you already are going into something, especially if the material is pretty sensitive, because I've worked with clients before who are coming to me with pretty traumatic events and they're wanting to write them down. I think exactly what you said, of making your comfort area zone pretty clear from the jump is really important. And another thing that I think is important is for if clients understand kind of like what elements of their life they want to focus on, that's really helpful. Some clients come to me and they're like, here's my whole life story. Where are we headed with this? And I think it's a little bit more helpful to come into the process having spent some time thinking, oh, this is the section of my life that I really want to focus on, or these are the themes, or these are kind of the areas of focus. And so having some element of a vision for the book itself is really helpful, because while I can start from zero with people who are just handing me kind of like their whole life story and then we shape it from there, I think that it's more fruitful if people are able to, get an understanding of how they want to present their vision of the book. And it doesn't have to be fully formed, but I think doing some deep thinking and journaling on that before you come to a ghostwriter is helpful. So then you can also see if that ghostwriter has a similar vision as you do, and feels like they're the right fit for you from the beginning.
Those are great answers. I appreciate that. So you offer lots of services. You mentioned one just a minute ago about developmental editing, but you've got a 30-day freedom in freelancing program that you offer, which I found fascinating. And so why don't you just, before we take questions, and we're going to take questions in just a minute, just go through some of the things that you do. I put this up so people can have a look at this slide at their own leisure as they're watching this now and as they're watching the replay. But you've got this, and maybe you want to talk about this, maybe you want to talk about your other offerings, but give us a sense of what else you do, and I'll show people at the end how to get in touch with you, and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, definitely. So this is my signature one-on-one coaching program. I've been running it for the last few years, and it's basically for freelancers who maybe have read my book, Six Figure Freelance Writer, and they're really needing some accountability and one-on-one support to either get their freelancing off the ground or to recover from burnout and kind of find a new way into their current freelancing business. And so I work with people who are brand new in freelancing, as well as people who want to shift and grow their business in a different direction. And so during this 30-day program, I do weekly one-on-one sessions where I prepare a presentation and I go through different concepts and then leave a lot of time for Q&A and discussing their specific case. I will often help people who are trying to revamp their freelancing website, who are trying to find different strategies to get clients, and I customize the roadmap specifically to what their needs are. I send them resources, whether those are different freelancing tools to help them with every part of their process, from the prospecting to getting clients, as well as to time and energy management, which is so key as a freelancer because when you have multiple clients, it can be really overwhelming to balance it all. I also go through and create a personal branding audit for them, helping them kind of make their personal brand really cohesive because that changed the game a lot. Because that's all about building trust with your potential clients who are about to hand you quite a bit of money to do something for them, and they need to be able to trust you from your internet presence. And then
Yeah.
from there, I'll create a roadmap for the month to how I'm going to work with each individual client and the milestones and accountability that we need along the way. And it's been really cool to see the clients that I've worked with. And I have some testimonials on my website of people who have really had a good time working with me and seeing their business grow, able to like really kind of get what they want out of their work. And so it's been just one of my great joys because I made so many mistakes starting earlier in my career and I like to help other people avoid it.
Ah, those mistakes early on that you'd like everyone to avoid. Yes, I have quite a list of those as well. So people can reach you at amysuto.com. You have a wonderful Substack for the desk of Amy Suto at substack.com. And so what we're going to do now is take some questions. Actually, I'll leave this slide up for a minute before we, so you can write that down or take a screenshot or whatever. We've got a bunch of questions for those of you who want to ask a question. We're going to leave another 10 minutes or so for that. And there is a questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So put them in there and we're going to start taking those right now. So get a sip of water, Amy, and here we go. Mike asks, where do you think the line is between heavy editing and ghostwriting?
Yeah, I think that the line can sometimes be a little bit blurry, and that's why I sometimes take on clients who have a draft, but it needs to be heavily edited, and it's clear they also need an implementation in those notes that gets into ghostwriting. And so I think that the line can be blurry, but that's why I like to hop on calls with clients and kind of check out their drafts beforehand because sometimes you just can't get the draft over the finish line on your own. And that's where you need not just an editor, but an editor who can also be your ghostwriter and fix that draft for you and get it across the finish line.
Great. Mike also asks, what do you do with a client who thinks there's a different story there than the one you see? Yeah, it sounds like an
Oof,
experienced editor on the
yeah.
line.
Yeah, I think this is the complicated thing. And ideally, when you're starting at from the first discovery call, that's kind of the time to really understand what is the motivation for this person telling their story. And if it's not a motivation that you necessarily agree with, or if it's not something that sounds like a good project for you to spend, 6 months or longer with somebody, then that is the time to gracefully exit. But if you're stuck in the middle of a project and you're kind of just realizing that your version of the book and the client's version of the book aren't really lining up, it's that's a good kind of point to understand, like, okay, what is the middle ground? Like if they're thinking about option A, you're thinking about option B, there is an option C. And that's kind of where my background in Hollywood has been really helpful, is being able to pitch a third option that solves problems that still makes the client happy. And I think that just comes from experience, because that's part customer service and then part deep knowledge of story structure and getting creative with a solution that will help to bridge that gap and still make a great story that the client will be happy with, but will still be that story that readers are happy to read.
That's a terrific answer. I love that. A, B, and then there's C. Okay, so Amy asks, how are books credited? Can you list ghostwriting on your CV or list of publications?
Yeah, so every ghostwriter does it differently. For me, because I also have my own career as an author, I don't mind being a deep ghostwriter. I don't get any credit on my clients' books, and I'm more than happy to operate in that way because I have plenty of samples that clients can read if they wanted to check out my work. And then I have a few clients that are able to be serving as my references if a client really wants to talk to one of my previous clients. But for the most case, everything that I do is under NDAs. And so some ghostwriters operate differently where they're co-authors or they're not under a ton of NDAs and they're able to talk about the books or list them on their portfolios. And so that's something that you have to figure out with your own contracts and also how you want to operate. And everybody just has a different approach to it. But I get the question a lot of like, oh, don't you wish you were credited? And for me, no, I think it's my client's story and I'm just helping them. I'm the person who's channeling it for them and being their craftsperson. And so I'm happy for them to be front and center and for them to get all the credit because I have my own books that I get credit for. And so I think that that's kind of the distinction for me.
Yeah, the NDA, of course, is a non-disclosure agreement, and I think it's a really important aspect. And there's a bunch of questions coming in about those, but I think you mostly just answered it. But we'll see. So, how do you? Joe asks, how do you determine whether to publish someone's memoir through traditional big five path versus self or hybrid publishing? Do people who work with you ever push back if you recommend self hybrid?
No, I think that I mean I think that there's certain clients that really want to go the traditional publishing route, and that's totally understandable because that has been the dominant way of how books get discovered and published for a long time. But I do think that there's a shift of especially entrepreneurs who have strong marketing backgrounds and already have a personal brand and have a readership where they don't want to wait, however long it will take for their book to be traditionally published. They want to take the control of the book in their own hands. They want to publish their book on their schedule and they want to move it forward with self-publishing. And the interesting thing is that when you're buying a book on Amazon, it's becoming harder and harder to tell what has been self-published versus traditionally published, especially if you're buying a book on an Amazon e-reader and if the book is well done, it's well done, and if you don't even really recognize that. So I think that the stigma of self-publishing is disappearing a lot more, and I'm meeting a lot more clients who are more excited for the self-publishing route, especially because they want to be able to see the royalties come in on a dashboard. They want to be able to have control over their cover and things like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Charlie asks, do you always write a person's memoir in the first person? Do you ever write it in the third person?
Yeah, almost always I've written in first person with the exception of a project that the client really wanted it to be told almost as a story and to fictionalize elements of it, and we turned it into more of a third person story. And so I think that sometimes clients come in with a little bit of an out of the box vision, and if that's what they're really wanting and there's a way to do it artfully, I think that those are really exciting projects as well. But for the most part, if somebody is telling their story, you can get more personal with an I or first person approach. Whereas when you take the third person approach, you do distance yourself a little bit from the reader, especially in the memoir genre.
Yep. So we've got about 4 minutes left. We're going to try to bring this in at 10 of today. So we're going to keep these. I'm going to try to combine a couple of these questions. Joe asks about the difference between an editor and a ghostwriter. I think we went over that, but if you have anything more to say about that, Amy, go jump right in.
Yeah, I think that some people work with editors to get a better direction for them to go off and implement the notes, whereas ghostwriters might also have editing skills that they go off and implement for the writer. So really, ghostwriters are the ones in your draft typing, whereas editors sometimes are just giving you the notes for you to go and implement in a bigger way. And so it just depends on what type of editor, and each ghostwriter kind of has a different approach of whether or not they do editing or if they just do the entire process themselves.
Great. Elizabeth asks, any tips for turning summaries into scenes when you're relying on faded memories of your clients? Limited facts I can deal with, but the limited recollections of the emotions felt during certain life events is so hard.
Yeah, one thing that I find helps with clients that are kind of struggling to remember something is to walk through a five senses exercise and see if they, remember anything that they felt or heard or smelled, or kind of trying to walk through different senses, because sometimes in a moment they can remember a detail that unlocks other pieces. But sometimes with faded memories, it does kind of rely on the ghostwriter to add a little bit more of those details and try to stay as close to the subject matter as possible. But sometimes you just have to fill in the gaps. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the tricky part, is that memory is not always reliable. And so you as a ghostwriter are having to already deal on a slightly unreliable source. And so that's kind of where the artistry of the memoir comes in as well.
Yeah. So we've answered a couple of these. The price, Mary Jane, she talked about the price earlier, and it varies widely, but it can be $50,000 to $100,000 for a ghostwriter. But I think best to go to Amy's site and look around and see to the answers to some of these if we don't get your question answered today. But let's answer Chris's, which is, how do you show a prospect examples of your ghostwriting if with these NBAs and the anonymity? I think you
Yeah, so
kind of
that's where
answered that.
your port
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
go
where your
ahead.
portfolio really comes into place, and that's why publishing your own books under your own name is really helpful. Before I was a published author and I was starting to do my very, very early ghostwriting work, I ended up leaning on short stories that I had published and different personal essays that I had published. And so having some form of your writing out there can help. But if you're working under NDAs, you really have to build your own portfolio. And as a writer, that can be in the form of, a Substack newsletter, that can be in the form of a blog, that could be in the form of published personal essays. And I think personal essays are a great representation of what you can do in the memoir space. And so I highly recommend pitching that to publications like the LA Times and trying to figure out how to get your personal essays out there and validated so that people can see how you can write in that first person point of view in a memory in a short kind of period of time so that they can get a sense of your abilities.
That's great. And that answers another one of Chris's questions. So that I think does well. So Dee asks us, what can you share about ghostwriting scripts for podcasts, fiction or nonfiction? Is that something that's done?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the biggest
Me
problem with
neither.
the podcast market is that it's very small and there isn't a ton of money in it. And it's mostly a labor of love. And that's something that I've really enjoyed, creating with fellow writers and friends. But I think that ultimately in the podcast space, it's really challenging to monetize. And so there isn't really ghostwriting because if you're the one making the podcast, then it's going to be your name on it. Or, if you're going to be hired by a company to do writing, I haven't really seen any ghostwriting in the podcast space, but I could be wrong.
No, I haven't either. And they are acts of love, that's for sure. Okay, we're going to wrap this up with one or two more questions. One from Nisha. How do you get in with your first ghostwriting client? Great question, Nisha.
Yeah, I actually got my first ghostwriting client on the platform Upwork. And so that's why I think that these freelance platforms, they may be a little deceptive when you're kind of looking at them and you're seeing a lot of low paying jobs. But some of my best jobs on Upwork were people who found my profile and reached out to me directly. And so I think that some of these platforms are worth investing in because they are search engines and people can find you and ask you to do work in a way where you don't always have to be applying for jobs on the platforms to get work coming in. And so it's about trying to figure out how can you create these ways for people to find you and find your work and also bring awareness to the services that you offer.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to have the last question from Julie. I wanted my memoir to be about losing my husband to dementia, but there is also the story of our son. Oh, Julie, I'm so sorry. Who passed away 10 years ago. I always felt that it was a story unto itself, but it can't be left out of this memoir. I don't want to write an autobiography, but don't know how to leave the huge part of my life in the margins. So, any suggestions about pulling those two stories apart or braiding those two stories together, Amy?
Yeah, and Julie, I'm sorry that you went through that. I think that when it comes to bringing in two different stories, I think that there are certain memoirs out there that really kind of play with time and kind of braiding together different timelines and trying to find things that are connective tissue. And so I think that trying to figure out what are the memoirs that do that really well and try to form yours similar to that or see how there are different ways to structure and try to pull together the thematic moments or juxtapose moments that feel similar because that can help bring together the structure of the book and make it feel really intentional and whole and all under one roof.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So one last on a passing, oh, the slides are jumping around. As we exit this, do you have any tips on good titles, Amy?
Oh, I wish so. I mean, I really I think that the title has to come together at the end of the book because it's a little bit of magic. It's
Yep.
really hard to find a good title. It's a little bit of magic and a little bit of understanding your target audience and some of that marketing guru-ness, but the title has to feel the way that the book feels.
It does. That was a question from Susan. Thank you, Amy. That was a remarkable run of questions that you just took and a fabulous presentation. We're so grateful. I'm showing up on the screen, I'm showing what we do here at the Memoir Project. We've got all kinds of classes here, and we invite you to join us for more. If you want to join Amy, again, you can see her at amysuto.com. You can read her Substack. But I would like everybody to send up a thank you to Amy in the chat, if you would, or into the questions box more specifically. Thank you, Amy. That was fabulous. I so enjoyed it and I learned so much. We're so grateful. And everybody go see her at amysuto.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really wonderful being here and talking about memoirs. I just love being able to share my excitement with books for the world. So thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. We will see you again, I'm sure. All right, everybody. Oh, if the slides would stop moving around, it would be great. All right, everybody. Thanks. Write well. We're all going to go back to work now. Thanks again, Amy. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.